So I wanted to shoot a quick video of the deployable rack system. I can actually deploy this thing up so that my rooftop tent would be at the height necessary to deploy the ANX. I've got an iCamper X cover 2.0 with the ANX Plus, and I wanted to be able to store this trailer in my garage. And so it has to be at a height low enough to get through the garage door. And then when I get to the campsite, if we're going to deploy the annex, it has to be able to go up to about, let's say 6'6" or so. I'm 6'4", and I want to be able to walk underneath of the rooftop tent when it's deployed. And so about, I would say 6'6" is where I have it set to deploy. So it had to have some kind of mechanism. And the last trailer that I built had, again, another system where the actual roof or the top of the rack system would go up and down, but I had built in linear actuators, hooked it up to a battery system, and basically pushed a button, and it would raise all four of the linear actuators up so that this part here would actually deploy up to the height for the annex. And then when you were done, you would hit the button and it would lower it. Problem with that is those linear actuators are not perfect. Sometimes one would go a little bit faster than the others, and it would bind up the system. And so you have to jiggle the rack or go deselect all the switches except for the one, lower that one a little bit, and then off to the races again. Or you would get out there and your batteries would go dead, and you would have no way to lower the rack system because those linear actuators cannot be lowered by hand. And so I was like, on this build, it's a much smaller trailer. My other trailer was an M101A2. It was just a little bit too big and unruly to tow with our Jeep. And so I went ahead and got this Bantam. So what I did basically is put L channel across each of the sides of the bed and bolted it in where the stakes would normally stake down through these little square stake pockets. There's 3 of them on each side. And so I bolted in each one of the bolt-in places along the bed of the trailer so that I could have something rigid to start building my foundation from. And then after I put these L channels on here and got them solid, I cut a 1x1 piece of steel, 1x1x1 tubing, channel tubing, and then welded it in place. I welded one on the back, and then I welded 2 on the front. One to be able to bolt the big Northern toolbox there. It's a 48-inch Northern tool cargo box for a truck bed. They mount them on semis or backs of trucks to keep your tools and stuff in. And so one of those mounts here on the front, so it goes clear across this. It's a perfect width. This is 48 inches from here to the other side. So it's a perfect 48-inch box on the front. And then another one will mount here, comes up to about there, all the way back to right under where I built this, and then straight down. And so I can bolt the box in here, bolt it in here. So those boxes are very solid. So once I had the boxes in place, I decided that I would build my rack system around the boxes. And so basically what I did was built one big square tubing frame back here on the back of the trailer, this being hollow. So I welded directly to the top here, and then this piece of the rack system is hollow, and then on the inside there's a tube that runs down the middle that I built a hinge system here. It hinges on the back just so it can go up and down. This pole does not articulate forward and back because it's bolted directly into this one. And then it's also bolted here into the box. And so this has no movement on the back. You don't need movement on both of these poles. You only need movement, the ability of movement on this front pole, because that gives you the ability for this front piece to go backwards and forwards a little bit so that when you're raising this part up, it doesn't impinge on itself, because if it was straight, this tube was solid and rigid, and then you had a tube running down in the center of it. As you lifted, because you're not lifting all four corners at the same time, it's going to cause an impingement and it's going to get stuck. And so to make that not happen, I put a pivot point down at the base. And so basically built larger ones of these. What they actually look like. So I basically just took a piece of the channel and cut out the top part, and then this is actually the larger one that bolts down at the bottom up in the corners up there. There's one on each corner, and that's how that pivot point for that front pipe pivots on that. But basically you just take this, flip it upside down, welded it to the top mechanism. And basically the top mechanism is just a straight bar on this side, a straight bar on the other side, and then two cross members that I welded to form the top of the rack, and bolted it down to the bottom of the trailer so that the base of this one has a pivoting arc that it actually only pivots about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches to the rear. I don't think it ever goes forward, but it will pivot. This piece will lean in as we lift it. And I'll show you how this works here in a little bit. But because I wanted to be able to deploy this myself, it's very easy. The rooftop tent mounts to here. The front of the rooftop tent comes out to about here. I basically just put my hands under the front of the rooftop tent and I lift, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So I basically, these are just twist and locks. Now it's pulling in with a spring, and then I've drilled a hole at the height that I would need to make this deploy to be 6'6". And so once that's ready, basically pretend I'm putting my hand on the rooftop tent, lift this up, it locks into place. And as you can tell, this pole is now back a little bit because it's at a fixed point back here. So it gives me the geometry to be able to not have this bind up at all. And it's very easy for me to deploy. It locked itself into position here. This one's not quite locked in, as you can tell, but if I jiggle it, there we go. Now it's locked in. I just painted it, and so it's probably binding on the paint. But now on the back, I've also built, I call it the key. It's just a pole that you can pull out of the system to give you a little bit more leverage. And then make sure these are set to deploy. And basically just put your hand here, lift it up, and now it locks into place. There we go, jiggle that one in. This one's locked into place, and then you just push the key back in. This key actually can comes out all the way, and it's basically just shaped like this, right? And then you could actually slide it into the front, into each one of these tubes. And so I could use it on the front to raise it and then take the key to the back. It just gives you more leverage. If you're not tall, I'm 6'4", so it's easy for me to deploy this without using the key. I do use it on the back just to give me that extra leverage, but I usually grab the front of the rooftop tent and just lift up the front, and then it's deployed. And so now it's at a height that's tall enough, doesn't hit me in the top of the head, and we can deploy the annex. And then you just pack away for stowage. You pull out on this, it unlocks one side. The other side's gonna fall down automatically just from gravity. And then once it's down, you go back to the front. You'd always lower this end first so that, again, there's no impingement. And you just come back to the front, do the same thing, unlock that locking mechanism, come over to this side, unlock it, the rooftop tent lowers itself. Now you could have two people lower it slowly, but I've raised it and lowered it many times with the rooftop tent on there. The rooftop tent's only like 125 pounds or so. It's the X-Cover, the iCamper X-Cover 2.0. So it's not real heavy. And it deploys down just fine. Doesn't hit these boxes or anything. Like I say, the boxes mount to about here. And I'll show you what those boxes look like. I gotta put them back on. I took it all apart so that I could paint the underside of these poles in the rack system so that I wouldn't have any rust. But now I got it all painted. I'll get it all put back together. And like I say, you can deploy any kind of rooftop tent to this. It has the two crossbars here that you mount the rooftop tent to. And then it's easily deployable by one person. And so you could use two people if you wanted to, but I'm 6'4", about 225, so I'm a pretty big guy. So it's easy for me to deploy. I think it would be easy for even a smaller person to deploy it. That way you can get the tent set up on your own and lower it. But that's it. It's the Bantam T3C, which is a much smaller footprint than the M101A2. I've got these drop-down legs that I've welded to the front that drop down to give it rigidity when it's parked. I think I'm gonna put two more on the back possibly at some point. Even though it doesn't give me a lot of movement when we're parked, I just want something for a little bit more stability than what I have. But very easy build, something you could teach yourself to weld. I bought myself a chop saw and a welder earlier this year. And I used to use a welder at a shop and taught myself how to weld at one of those maker spaces, and decided, you know what, I'm just gonna buy one, put it in my garage. And now I can do projects like this, but very simple design. Like I say, this cross member, welded directly over to the other side, one in the back. And this is with the larger 1 inch by 1 inch. And then this is a smaller piece here. It's like, I don't know what it is. It's like 7/8 maybe by 7/8. And then there's a piece of channel that's the leg that's, again, pivoted here at the top, pivot at the top and the rear, and then solid at the bottom, because again, this piece does not articulate. It's all solid and will not move. And that gives you the ability to raise the front first and then raise the back end up. And by having that front be able to go forward and back, there's no impingement whatsoever. And so you don't have to lift all four corners at the same time, which really makes this the best way to build a self-rising and lowering. I think it would make it even better too for articulation if I'd built my original rack this way. But the way it was built, the front and back were both solid. And anytime that one corner got out of whack with the others, it would bind up and stick. And so that was always a pain. And so I think you could probably even use two articulating motors instead of the four that I had on the last build. But again, I didn't want the headaches of having something go wrong with that. And so I wanted to be able to deploy it on my own and then put the rack back down and be able to take off. I usually am the one deploying the tent. So that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. But a very simple, easy build. I think all the steel probably ended up costing me maybe close to $400, if that. But then I welded it myself. I'm not a super welding guy, but it's good enough for my standards, and it works very well. And so it gives me the small footprint trailer that I can tow with my Jeep, and the ability to have a rooftop tent that we could actually sleep in at this position. But if we're going to deploy the annex, it has to be at that 6'5", or there's just too much material at the bottom of the annex and it's all baggy. And so I needed something that would get it up. I needed it down low enough to get in and out of the garage. And this clears the garage, I don't know, I would say by 6 inches or so. So it's at the perfect height when it's at the lower position. And then when it's deployed up, it's at the perfect height to deploy the annex. So simple system, very simple build, very nice having all three of the storage boxes, and I'll show you a few pictures at the end what those look like after I mount them back up. And it's actually a pretty kick-ass trailer. Thanks for watching.